5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
And welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. This is the Talking Warhammer segment. I am very excited to welcome to the show today Phil Marsh. Phil, welcome to the show.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking all things Age of Sigmar.
Oh, it's great to have you. I know that it's been a little bit to try to get you on the show, but I'm very excited here. You're just coming off of not only winning the U.S. Open here in New Mexico recently at the end of November, but I believe that you also had some Six Nations games that you had under your belt, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The week after New Mexico, flew to Belfast with England, and we won Six Nations, and personally went 5-0, which was quite nice on my debut appearance.
That is great. That's great to hear, and I definitely want to get into that a little bit more after we talk about some of your U.S. Open stuff. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're kind of probably a little bit of an enigma to most of our listeners who are here based in the United States. We've got some of our big names that we follow here, but you come in here to the U.S. Open and winning. I think for those people who are not familiar with Team England, or, the English meta, that was a bit of a surprise. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You told me earlier before the show you play Age of Sigmar pretty much every day.
Yeah, so I guess an enigma is right. I only really started playing competitively in September of last year. So, coming out of COVID, I decided I was going to really grab the bull by the horns and play as many events as possible. So I think last season I ended up playing nearly 30 events, of which I had 25 4-on-1s or better in a row.
Wow.
Exclusively playing Slaves to Darkness. And then, so off the back end of that season I decided to apply for England, which ultimately obviously got into based on what I've told you a little bit before this. But in the lead up to that I decided to show a bit of versatility and play some different armies. So I had 5 events back to back where I took different things, and I went 4-on-1 with them all. And as soon as I found out I was selected by England, I decided I'm going to go back home to Slaves to Darkness, and I've kind of not looked back since. I obviously took them to the US Open and showed the American meta what old Knights of the Empty Throne was all about, which was pretty exciting, and quite a lot of people weren't prepared for it, which was handy for me.
Oh, for sure. I was kind of following along, and I said, who is this guy that is winning with Slave to Darkness? And at first I was like, oh, wow, it's because there's a new book, obviously. But then I realized they didn't allow the new book there for the U.S. Open, and so you were doing it with old Slaves to Darkness, which is quite a feat in itself. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So we'll get into a little bit of that. I wanted to dive in. I want to kind of dig into some of your matches that you had there, and some of the tournament format. But before we really get started there, how's your hobby table?
My hobby table has probably an equal amount of pile of shame as every other hobbyist. Currently, I'm getting all prepared for the new Slates of Darkness release, so I've got 30 Chosen on my desk. I've got 10 Knights, Sigvald as well for a little bit of secret spice.
Okay.
So yeah, and 70 Splintered Fang, which I think everyone is going to hate me for, but you got to do what you got to do to take out events.
It's funny because some of those warband groups, or I guess you call them warbands or Warcry warbands, right? That are used in Slave to Darkness armies. They're actually pretty good. They got some sneaky things about them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them have had a really good glow up in the new book. So like Corvus Cabal, really good for the ability to start off the board and deep strike in. So it's handy for scoring battle tactics. I really like the Unmade. I think a few people have looked past them at the moment, but they turn off redeploy and rally within 12.
Wow.
So in a Chosen heavy list where it's all about foot slogging down the table, to stop them redeploying is going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, I lost a Nova Open game directly to one redeploy. Like they, I was outside of 3. I had my Dread Scythe Herodins. I was playing Night Hunt. I was outside of 3. They redeployed 4 inches, and I rolled a 6 on both of my charges. And so, I was 1 inch shy for both of those, and because of that, I didn't get into where I needed to be in, and that was the end of the game. Oh, it was. I'm like, these stupid redeploys. So having an Unmade's awesome, but yeah. So that sounds like a lot of stuff. I also have Splintered Fang, Unmade. Let's see the which other ones do I have? I pretty much have all of the war bands. Let's see, Dark Oath, Tarantulas Brood. I have all of them that really need to be painted, and part of that is because I am very much into Warcry, so I play Warcry quite a bit. And in fact, I was the tournament organizer for the Nova Open for Warcry. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's better models in the hobby really from an aesthetic point of view. They're all really unique, great fun to paint, and like I say, the fact that they all have pretty decent rules now, and that hopefully you'll see a lot more of them on the tabletop opposed to just Iron Golems and the Untamed Beasts.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, the Untamed Beasts. I know in the old book had their kind of redeploy, or I guess it was pregame movement that helped them. I don't know if they still have that in the new book, but it's okay. Cool. Yeah, it's still interesting to see how the from a Warcry community standpoint, how you've got the Slave to Darkness army guys, and we're all talking about the same models, which is kind of cool. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yeah, well, that's very cool. Some of the new Slave to Darkness models, especially like the Chaos Knights and things like that, were so amazing. And we got previews of the I guess it was about this time last year that we got the new Chaos Warriors. Is that right?
So they were in the Start Collecting box set. The only downside of that is you have no command sprues for either the Knights or the Warriors.
Oh.
So having to wait for the release from Games Workshop to have your Hornblowers and your Banner Bearers, etc., without having to do any conversions. So hopefully they'll come out with the release of the Battle Tome, which I'm hoping is before LVO, because I want to be able to take the biggest filth possible.
Awesome. Now, do you often come to the United States to play?
Don't often come to play. However, I think I've kind of decided I want to come to one event a year in the US. After New Mexico and everything, it was just a really cool experience to meet all the guys that I interact with on Twitter, like Gavin, Emma, Tom. To meet the Walters brothers as well was pretty cool. Both really, really sound individuals. Yeah, so just to really meet everyone on the scene, and yeah, I guess, like I say, the AOS community itself is probably quite small in comparison to other, like 40k, etc. But I think it's a lot more close knit. So when you have people being successful in the UK or the US or in Norway, everyone usually gets together and has conversations about what you're doing well and what they're doing well, and it's really beneficial to be able to speak to everyone. And there's like that common ground of we all love this hobby and we want to make it better. So how do we make other people better around us?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every guest that I've had on here has basically said the same thing about Age of Sigmar, which is the community is its biggest strength, in terms of the game, because you kind of look across the way at 40k, and I haven't really played. I've played a little. I dabbled a little bit in 40k when 9th edition dropped, but you kind of look across. You hear stories of like, the toxic community that they have sometimes, the competitiveness that happens, and I'm like, I just don't feel that about Age of Sigmar at all. In fact, my experience has been similar to what you have explained, which is, hey, we're out here to play a competitive game, and we very much enjoy doing it, but at the end of the day, like, we have a great time doing it, and if we can help each other be better, that just makes the game as a whole better.
Yeah, 100%. I also feel that when you're playing at events, your most relaxing games are the games at the top end of the room, because, like I alluded to, you have this mutual respect where you both understand the game really well, and you're both aware of each other's capabilities, and they're not going to try and be gamey or get salty over certain things, because we've all played this game to such a high level for such a, well, I say a long period of time. I've only been around for 15 months, but I've been consistent with it. Whereas when you're battling it out with the guys in the middle tables that are pushing for their first 3 and 2 or their first 4 and 1, they're the games where you tend to find there's a lot more pressure or eagerness from your opponent to try and get that win, whereas like when you're playing against other people that are anticipating to take the event out, it's quite a relaxed game, and it's like we have a big thing in the UK with playing by intent. So like if I'm saying my intent is to stay outside of 30, my opponent, unless it looks like I'm 12 inches away, is gonna be like, yeah, that's fine. My intent is to stay outside of 9 to stop you redeploying. Whereas some people, and you explain this all before the game, so like, and then your opponent will actually go like, are you wanting to stay outside of 9 just so that they don't have a gotcha on you when it clearly looks like you're 9 away? Whereas other players would be like, as soon as you finish that one move and you're 8.5 inches away, they're like, oh, I'm going to redeploy. You're like, okay, that's the type of game we're going to play, so that's fun.
It's interesting you say that, because I would say that is very prevalent with our best players that are out here. You talk about the Walters brothers. Not only have both of them been on this show, but they kind of live not too far away from me, and I'm in a chat thread with them, and they're always a pleasure to play with. And they're the same kind of guys, right? You're like, hey, I want to stay out of, I'm just moving my guys out of 3 right here, and it might be like 2.75 or something like that, but they're like, okay, I get it, you're out of 3, or just like what you were saying. And so it's interesting because it seems like the more confident players that we have here in the U.S., like the more that we see a lot of that similar, I guess sportsmanship is sort of the thing that I would call it, where it's like a mutual respect thing. I get what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to like play gotcha here. It seems like it's maybe some of the newer players that are trying to, like you said, that those middle tables where they're trying to get to that 4-1 or whatever, that maybe they're a little tense because it's kind of a nerve-wracking moment for them, so that they're a little uptight about it. But
Yeah, no, exactly. And like I said, I had the pleasure of playing Scooter, and he's an absolute hero to play against across the tabletop. He also has this amazing personality that just takes all stress away from you when you're playing against him, just because of the way he conducts himself at a table, which is amazing. But yeah, like I say, you get the people that are striving for their first 4-1 that they almost put too much pressure on themselves, and then they react badly when things don't go their way.
Yeah, unfortunately, because I think that's perfectly summarized. They put too much pressure on themselves, because they want it to be like to work out for them, and they've planned and they've played and they've practiced, and if it's not going that way, then sometimes there's some negative feelings that come up, right? So yeah, it's a very interesting to see that way. Now, you have been playing for 15 months, and you're absolutely crushing it. I do have to ask, how did you get to this point? I mean, I've been playing for a couple of years, but I don't think I've been playing nearly as much as you. I'm a dad, I'm kind of busy, and I try to get games in where I can. But how did you get to the point from like picking up, your first models to 15 months later, like winning the U.S. Open?
So I guess, like I say, competitively started 15 months ago. I kind of got back into the hobby during COVID, I guess. My brother was home from the military. I was working from home, so we're like, should we try Age of Sigmar? Should we get back into Warhammer? Have something to do? That ended up with buying probably 10 armies between us during COVID. Yeah,
because you don't need money. I mean, what is money, right?
You couldn't go anywhere during COVID, so it was well, I've always been terrible for saving money, and it's always been a case of let's buy the new shiny thing. So I then saw the Archeon model was instantly sold, and so we played an awful lot during COVID, but not necessarily at the high end level that I'm now playing at, but more learning the grasp of the game. And then I then went to my first tournament in September of last year. I was a horrible person that took 60 Sentinels, and I went 3-2. Really got a bug for it. And then like I said, I did probably about 30 two-day events in the last 15 months, of which I've only gone 4-1 and better, which ultimately I'll put down to finding the club that I play for in Lance and Buckler. We've got quite a lot of good players, and I've kind of learned the hard way. One of the regular people that I play is Laurie Huggett-Wild, who ex-captain of England, current player of England, and he really knows his stuff. So to get in lots of games with him on a regular basis really elevated my play style. And then I probably play 67 games a week. So I'm getting in as many reps as possible, really learning the minutiae of the way my army wants to play. But that also allowed me to understand the way I like to play. So, I guess in the UK you have two Slaves to Darkness players really, in myself and Toby Meadows, who obviously both play for England, have both been really successful with them, but we play very differently. He likes to be a lot more reserved and play on the counter attack, whereas I like to go in, smash face, and force my opponent to make decisions that they didn't really want to have to make. So yeah, just finding that playstyle that suited me, and Archeon really played into that. So yeah, I used and abused Archeon for the best part of a year, which ultimately led me getting into England. Archeon got me invited to New Mexico because of my results with him at the LGT. Which ironically, if I knew qualifying from the LGT would get me a place at New Mexico, I probably wouldn't have taken Archeon, because I don't think he's the best list, but he's the list I enjoy the most. But he got me there, and then I didn't take him. I took something else. So I wasn't going to travel 27 hours not to try and win the event.
Right. Yeah, definitely. There's two things that you said in there that I kind of want to pick up on. The first is that I kind of feel like it's the importance of a good mentor, right? Having like better players teach you the game regularly. I know that I benefited myself from being able to play with some pretty high level players. Nate Trentinelli, Matt Barker, James O'Brien. Like I've played against the Walters brothers regularly, so like that has helped me play against these top level players, and it's kind of like iron sharpens iron, in that sense. So I can't help but think that was as you mentioned, that's a major part of success that you have when you get to play against a former captain of Team England, right?
Yeah, massively. I always say to my friends that I play regularly, you only learn by losing, and I got smashed a lot playing against Laurie when I was first learning to play competitively, because there's just playing Warhammer, and then there's playing competitive Warhammer, which you soon realise it isn't about killing stuff, it's about the movement phase, and that is the biggest thing. Yeah. So true. And that's the biggest thing that I took away from him, whereas back when I was first starting out, I was so focused on smashing people off the table without really playing the primary. And then having played and lost a lot, when I've noticed that my army's not really been picked apart too much, gave me a much different outlook on the way the game is intended to be played. But then, equally, I played a list that allowed me to do both, which kept my interest, which is why I probably played the same list for as long as I did. Because, obviously, Archeon's command ability that used to be able to do every turn, which was to look into the future and see who had priority, would allow you to go for that double turn where you can lift the army as well as playing the mission. Was hugely beneficial for me. It did mean after that year of playing him religiously, I had to learn Warhammer again, because when you have to then roll for priority without knowing the outcome, it can be a bit more dicey.
literally dicey. Yeah, definitely. And when you play with some of those really good players, the best moments are after you got smashed and you say, "What did I do wrong?" And they say, "Well, we're going to tell you. Here's what you did wrong, and here's like what you could have done better that would have caused different outcomes." And so usually those post game discussions I'd have with some of these players is where I really learned how to play Warhammer. It was not actually in rolling the dice; it was afterwards, like kind of breaking down the the movements that I did, and I say movements because that was almost entirely like where I made mistakes was in the movement phase.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. I'd say that's the biggest part of post game at every game that we play, whether it's at an event, at club. We even have club games where we just say, look, we're going to play with an open book, and we're going to walk through each player's turn with the most optimised way of doing it for the both of us to really see how that mission should go from like the epitome of competitiveness of all the right decisions being made and just seeing how that then unfolds, which is particularly beneficial when you're playing like Team Warhammer on the international stage, because you're not coming up against your average Joes, you're honestly coming up against, for the most part, the 8 best players for that country.
Yeah.
So you have to assume that when you're doing your matchups and you're doing your pairings, that they are going to make every right decision. So to be able to walk through that in preparation and seeing the ins and the outs that you have against that is great to do, especially when you've got equally good players to playtest with back home. So yeah, we do, like I say, we do it after games if you just want to have a real slugfest and play it competitively without any information. But we also play games where, like I say, it's an open book, so you're asking for opinions as you're playing out your turns, and they're giving you insights as to what they think the optimal play is, etc. Which is also, it's a very different way of playing, and for a lot of competitive wargamers, everyone likes to win. So when you're having to tell your opponent how they win, it's all fun and games for the first few turns, and then it gets a bit spicy at the back end of the game.
Right. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on was that you said that you needed to find what your play style was, and I think that that's such an insightful comment there, because folks just say, "Oh, I'm going to pick up this army, I'm going to learn how to play it, and then I'm going to go and do it." And it's interesting because that's not necessarily learning your, like, if that army fits your play style and how you like to do things. And I'm bringing up the Walters brothers again, but you've got Scooter and you've got Caleb, and those two play very, very differently. And they've both been playing their armies for a long time, and they just know that that is their play style, right? Scooter loves to smash and bash, and Caleb loves to kind of sit back and blast you with magic and kind of castle up a little bit. And so learning that is, I think, is very important. For example, I played Night Hunt. That was my first army that I did. And then after LVO 2020, during the pandemic, I said, okay, I'm going to switch to a new army. I've been playing this for a couple of years. Let me switch to a new army and learn it. And I switched to Orcs back then, which was great. But it took me a lot of relearning. And I started playing the Orcs like Night Hunt. I was being really cagey with them, and trying to kind of like keep them out of combat, which was like entirely the wrong way to play that army. So, but I was trying to like change my play style because I had just gotten so used to it. So, my question to you is, when you're first starting out and you choose an army, like kind of like, does the army choose you in terms of your playstyle, or do you choose the army in terms of your playstyle? Like, is it the chicken or the egg?
I guess for me it's probably, this is going to sound like I'm sitting on the fence. It's a bit of both. Like, aesthetically, I have to like the look of the army if I'm going to play it. However, it has to be able to do what I want it to do on a tabletop as well. So you might have the nicest looking army in the game, but it's a really reactive army opposed to proactive, and it would probably mean I wouldn't pick it up, because I wouldn't enjoy the way that I have to sit and castle and wait for it to play. Like, I played Thunder Lizard at one event with barely any practice games, went 5-0, and said it was the worst weekend of my life. Like, I didn't enjoy the way it played at all. because it was so reactive, and you just sat in this little castle, and if your opponent made one or two mistakes, it was game over. Whereas I prefer an army which I can put on a tabletop, know that I'm going to get right up in your face, put as much pressure on you as possible. It takes all decision making away from me to a certain degree, and put so much pressure on my opponent in multiple places on the table that they need to make the right decision in their turn to get them out of this predicament. And when you've got 2 to 3 decisions to make, and you're under a lot of pressure, you don't necessarily see which the best one is. I also like rolling a dice, so just sitting there and casting like 8 spells a turn doesn't really do it for me. Like I'm a big fantasy guy. I want to get in the middle of the board and have a massive fight. That's the way I like to play. So if the army isn't prepared to do that, I'm probably not going to pick it up.
So let me ask you this: how long did it take you to figure out? Because Slaves of Darkness, you have a lot of different options you can play. In fact, you mentioned that the other Slaves of Darkness player in the UK plays a very different army than you do. How long did it take you to figure out what within your army? So you said, okay, I like playing Slaves of Darkness. I'm kind of figuring out my play style. How long did it take you to figure out like what your playstyle was? And did you like buy a whole bunch of different models and be like, yeah, that didn't work, and then buy other ones and be like, yeah, that didn't work, and then kind of buy one and be like, yeah, this is the one, right? Maybe kind of Goldilocks it a little bit with some of the models.
Yeah, so I guess ultimately I found out my playstyle wasn't sitting back after playing 2 events with Lumineth. I didn't really enjoy just being sat in your deployment zone and trying to shoot people off a table. So I had a look at the armies that I'd also collected during COVID, and I thought, you know what, let's have a look at Archaon. I saw his rules, got really excited by the prospect of like not having to roll for priority and having that information to know that you could push at that point where you know you're getting a double turn, so you can go in, clear screens on turn 1, and then turn 2 you've got the other pieces to go in and smash face. I was quite lucky in terms of not having to buy too many models, because when I bought into Slaves of Darkness from the first point, Archaon and the Varangard were just the nicest models visually to me, so I just bought them anyway. I also bought, like a bit like yourself, bought every Warcry warband, so it's a case of just doubling up on a couple, like the Untamed Beasts and Iron Golems. So I essentially had it all, and then the other major benefit I had was Laurie, who obviously taught me a lot. He had gone 5-0 3 tournaments in a row with Archaon, so I got an awful lot of advice from him, and I was lucky enough to watch him play at a teamless event where I went over just to spectate and saw the way in which the army played and was like, wow, this is really different to how I've seen Warhammer be played in the past, so let's give that a go. And like I say, I never really looked back. I think I took him to 25 events in a row or something, and like I say, I got this reputation for being the Archaon player in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, he's an absolute beast, right? So, you know, I like if you've got him, like use him. And in terms of figuring out your army, it does kind of help that he's like, you know, I think he's almost around 900 points.
Yeah, 860.
Yeah, so I mean that's, you know, more than a third of your army. So in terms of other, and then if you're using Varangard, that's also pretty pricey. So you don't need to worry about you know, buying a ton of models if you like those ones already. because I know for me, when trying to figure out sort of my play style, I like I said, I started out with Night Hunt, and I started out with like tons of chain rasps. So I was playing Horde Army ish, and I realized that I didn't love moving all of those models. Like I was just like, this is kind of a slog. I don't like it as much, and so I needed to pivot. I switched up. I got some Hex Rays. I got a Black Coach. I got some other things, and so that way I had much more movement, and that seemed to fit a lot more with what I was trying to do than, kind of be an enduring Horde model thing. Although I will argue that I think the Chain Rasps is the best point-for-point battle line unit in the game. They're just like so stupidly endurable or enduring on the table. So I kind of missed them a little bit because I don't play with them too much anymore. But they're on my shelf, staring at me, telling me, "Why don't you play with me anymore?" So, well, let's talk about the U.S. Open. So you won the London GT, which did you win the London GT, or did you just place really well to qualify?
I placed really well to qualify. So Darren Watson won it, and got invited to New Mexico's best general. And then I came in the top 5, I believe, but also got loads of sports votes. So I qualified as best overall, which was it was pretty surreal because we weren't told prior that doing well at this event would get you invited to New Mexico.
That's really funny because I think that all of our major opens, right, that we had, I think the winner, it was definitely the winner that was invited, but sometimes they did best overall and best general. But I think Adepticon, like there was kind of a scandal with Adepticon here where they kind of miscalculated the points, and they had invited one person and it should have been another person, and so they just said, both of you come, So it's kind of awkward because they kind of messed up how some of the scoring worked, but anyway, it all worked out in the end. Yeah, so you get the invite to come out here, and you are sitting in front of a field of, I believe it was 16 players, right?
Yeah, so it was broken down into 2 groups of 8, so you had 8 in best overall and 8 in best general. So I was in the best overall category, and interestingly, it was all done on ITC rankings. So in the UK, we don't really do anything with the ITC. So going in, I was obviously seeded as the bottom seed in best general. However, at the time, I believe I was ranked 2 in the UK and 4th in the world in the rankings that we use in the UK. So just off the bat, I was quite looking forward to coming over and proving a point, especially considering I had to play against the number 1 seed in my category, game 1, which was Matt Beasley. So yeah, it was good fun.
Very good. So Matt Beasley was your first one. I believe he playing Seraphon?
He was playing Zinch. So yeah, lots of summoning. So had him round 1. Didn't win a single priority, which was not fun for me at all. So ended up losing by 1 VP, but he played a really good game, and it kind of meant if I wanted to win the tournament, I had to do it the long way and play 7 games of Warhammer in 2 days, which was not ideal after travelling for 27 hours the day before. So I had to just put on my big boy pants and rock it out and make sure I did what I needed to do to play day 2.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the format really quickly before we get into some of the games that you played. This was kind of a double elimination tournament where if you lost, you kind of got put into the consolation bracket. But if you won the consolation bracket, you could move your way up into playing for the win again, right?
Yeah.
So is this a tournament that you're familiar with? Is this one that you play in the UK very often? Because was like, I don't know if it's brand new in the United States, but we definitely don't. We use Swiss pairings more often than not.
Yeah, so I've never seen this before. However, I think in terms of for the event itself, it worked perfectly. It meant that even once you've lost one game, you're not out of the running, and you can still go on to win the event. Whereas, I guess in Swiss, like, assuming there's a high amount of players at an event, if you lose a game, the likelihood is you're not going to win the event because someone will go 5-0. But in this, with only 8 players, the double elimination was really good. It obviously meant that if you did lose game 1, you still had an opportunity to go on and win it. However, it did mean that some people did only play 2 games of Warhammer, which I guess when you're travelling as far as you have, probably wasn't ideal for some people, but equally it was all funded by Games Workshop, so they can't complain too much.
Right, and I think that's probably the reason why we don't see this format pretty much in any other tournament, because there would be some pretty hurt feelings if you paid and entered into a GT, and you only got 2 games in that weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Warhammer's such a high cost hobby, I guess, with all the travelling that you need to do for events, with hotels, diesel, flights, or even event tickets, right? So, like, most weekends away do end up costing quite a large amount of money. So if you were to get knocked out after 2 games, you probably wouldn't be best pleased.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is I don't know about you, but well, probably not you, since you keep going 4-1 and 5-0 and all that stuff. But if I go 2-3 on a weekend, some of my favorite games are those last ones where I'm playing other folks that kind of are also 2-3 or 3-2 or something like that. Some of those games are just like have been so much fun to play. Very chilled out and relaxed because we know that we're not competing for the top table or whatever. And, having a tournament format where it's a double elimination kind of eliminates that fun that you could have too. And just more experience as well, where you just, playing more Warhammer. So that's pretty great.
Exactly. And people play at events for different reasons. So I go to events to try and win them. Other people go to events to have that break from their very busy life and play 5 games of Warhammer where they can forget about the real world and play with their fantastically painted miniatures and really immerse themselves into that side of the hobby, and to have conversations with like-minded people for a weekend, to give them that break that everyone needs from real life for those 2 days. So I think, like you alluded to, for some people, the games day 2 where they're duking it out for the wooden spoon are actually their most enjoyable games because they found their footing in the event. They're not playing against all the tryhards on day 1, and they're just having great games of Warhammer, running around with 50 squigs or 200 stabbers or whatever, but they're loving their life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the point you made is very apt here, which is if Games Workshop's doing the all paid expenses or all expenses paid, You play 2 games, you're out. You get to still have a good time that weekend and not worry about the cost of it or feel like you lost out on it. So I don't know that we'll see any formats pop up like that anytime soon here in the United States. I think we'll stick to the Swiss pairings, and everybody gets 5 games regardless. Just because I don't know that it'll be very good for the community, but I think an end tournament like this, a kind of an open tournament, it's kind of interesting, and I think it led to some really cool matchups that we ended up seeing.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it will probably stay next year as well when it's done again. So yeah, it was for me. It was great because I ended up, like I say, playing 7 games of Warhammer, and making the most of being out there. And also those that did only play 2 games, like I say, they'd been flown from wherever they were in the country or wherever they were in the world, and had been booked into this fantastic resort where they could then go and spend the rest of the weekend exploring Albuquerque or making the most of all the amenities that were available at the resort we stayed at. So
Yeah.
it was
Which
nice.
looked super fancy, by the way.
Oh, it was amazing. The views were incredible. The rooms were fantastic. I just wish I won the first game so I could have experienced a bit more of Albuquerque and not had to play till midnight. But it's all good. I understand why. While I was out there to play games of Warhammer opposed to have a free holiday in New Mexico. But
Yeah.
the resort itself was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, very cool. Now, before, like you talked about, you played Matt Beasley first. Before we get into that, what was the list that you were taking?
So I took my Knights of the Empty Throne list, which is a list that I knew I was going to be playing for England in Belfast the week after. So I thought it was a great opportunity to get more reps in with that. The list is essentially 2 units of 6 Vanguard, which are heroes. And then it's all about buffing them to the best they can be. So you have 2 Sorcerer Lords and a War Shrine, and then you just have loads of Iron Golems to fill out your battle line. But essentially, the way the list works is that it has a lot of save stacking. So you get Oracular Visions on the Sorcerer Lords, which gives +1 save. You've obviously got 2 of them, and it can stack, so it's not specific to, can only affect 1 unit. You then have the War Shrine, which if you pray to Tzeentch, you'd get +1 save and a 4-up spell ignore. And then, being in Tzeentch, you reroll all your 1s and have a 5-up spell ignore as well. So, the way it works is you essentially have 2 units of unkillable Vanguard, unless you can do mass mortal wounds outside of the magic phase, because once per game you can get your 1 unit of Vanguard on +6 to their save, re-rolling 1s.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, when Scooter warged and sent his whole army into 1 unit. And then they have the ability to have a 4-up, 5-up, 5-up spell ignore. So if you're trying to do me in the magic phase like Seraphon do or Tzeentch do, the likelihood is you're going to do no damage to me as well. So you have to really do mass mortal wounds in the combat phase or the shooting phase to really do anything to my army. And then it's just a case of getting the right scenarios. So the list really wants to play in a bubble, which doesn't suit the way I play. And this was the list that Toby Meadows basically played for England, and we agreed it was the better of the 2 for teams. So it doesn't like to spread itself out too far. So like playing on 6 objectives is pretty horrible. And you kind of want to play on 3 or the Prize of Gallic because it's all quite close. Um, but yeah, like I said, if you can't do mass mortal wounds, you're really not doing any damage at all to the army.
That's crazy. That man, I can only imagine, like, just rolling tons of dice and being like, well, nothing happened. Just because I guess unless you roll, I mean, you're re-rolling ones on your save. So, like, even if you do roll a one, like, maybe one wound goes through on a whole bunch, So,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, it's pretty impressive when you explain it to people as well, and
Yeah.
it all starts clicking in their head that they're trying to work out how they actually do any damage, and then you tell them they don't, essentially.
Yeah, so you don't. So, and what's interesting about that too is that you've also taken away. I mean, you've basically taken away the combat phase and the. Oh, now, does all this save stacking happen in the hero phase, or does it happen in the combat phase too, or?
So yeah, like one of the ways of initiating the +1 save is all-out defense.
Right.
But you can get +1 save 3 times with 4 times with Finest Hour once per game. But you can get +1 save 3 times without any interaction from your opponents. So it's pretty hard to deny it.
Yeah.
And then obviously you can, with prior game knowledge of knowing your opponent's army, you can then work out, do you need to fully save stack one army, one unit of Vanguard even, or can you spread out the save stacking and send both in, knowing that they can't deal with either unit.
Right.
So what tends to happen is you would save stack your general because they pile in 6 and your opponent can't retreat from them. So you end up pinning your opponent in their deployment zone with a unit that they can't do any damage to.
Right.
But yeah, it's doesn't make for too much of a fun game when once you get it all off and they're just stuck there swinging with you, knowing they can't trade, because the output from the Vanguard is pretty oppressive as well.
Yeah, for sure. They are kind of a hefty price tag in terms of both pound cost, dollar cost here, but also points cost. But they definitely are worth those points.
Yeah, no, 100%. Just the ability to fight twice. In the old book, they could re-roll all hits and wounds as well with spells or a prayer from the War Shrine. So the consistency in which they do damage was like second to none. So
yeah,
really amplifies their output.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so if you you played Matt Beasley the first round, and I think lost that first round. So what was your journey like after that?
So lost to Matt Beasley by 1 VP. It then meant I had to play, I believe it was Evan Markham, who's from SoCal, down in, plays in California.
Yep.
He was playing Skaven, and he lost that game in his deployment phase, so we played my turn, and then he conceded. So he was playing Skaven, and he deployed assuming he was going to give the turn away and that I'd hit his screen, or I'd just sit there and not do anything. But he deployed too close, so I was happy when he gave me the turn, and I went in and I took off 20 Clan Rats, a Warbringer, and 6 Storm Fiends with 1 unit of Iron Guard. Yeah.
The Storm Fiends hurts the most there, for sure.
Yeah, so
yeah.
When he had lost all of that with 1 unit of Iron Guard double fighting, he was pretty happy to hug it out and realised he'd done a misplay. I said, "Oh, can you at least just fire your Warp Lightning cannons so we can see if they would do much damage and potentially get you back in the game?" And I think they killed like 1.5 Iron Guard. Yeah, he didn't roll those elusive ones for the power on the warp lightning cannons and was rolling fives and sixes, unfortunately. But yeah, he lost that game in his deployment. So that was quite without being too egotistical, was quite a straightforward game.
Yeah.
I then had the pleasure of playing against Gareth Thomas, who is the TO for Old Town Throwdown, and I believe also helps with LVO. So I played against him with his Khorne, and Khorne really isn't too nice a matchup for me if he can get Scarbrand off, because my list can deal with Rend for forever, but Scarbrand is a different entity all to himself with his mortal wound output.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I won the right priorities, and when Scarbrand did hit me, he left me with 2 Varangard, which could still double fight, and then those 2 Varangard killed Scarbrand, and then with Rally managed to get my Varangard back up to like a decent size unit, whilst the other 6 Varangard dealt with the rest of his army. And obviously the pile-in 6 and being able to auto-run a unit and giving them a 22-inch threat range meant I could get around the Khorne Demon Prince as well, because I wasn't needing to charge. I could just pile into things and use the Khorne tricks against them, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was...
I was gonna say,
Sorry, it was Scarbrand one of the models that you kind of feared most during the tournament?
Scarbrand, yeah, based on my side of the pairings, it was Scarbrand, just purely because of the mortal wound damage. There wasn't really any other big models or units that I was too worried by.
Yeah.
Until I played against L with Gargants, having never played against the new book, and realised that a Mega could do 4d6 mortals on a 4-up. That was a tough lesson to learn. When I just thought, oh, I've played Gargants loads, I know how he win this, and then he just every time, like 4-up 4d6 mortals, that's 21 mortal wounds. That's 24 mortal wounds. I was like, okay, so the Vanguard are dead. Okay. Fortunately, like managing to trade in the right places meant I took off all 4 megas, top of 3. But not knowing that ability and sending my Vanguard in, yeah, had me sweating a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine. I can imagine. All right, so you played Gareth, and again, you're working your way kind of back up through the constellation bracket, right? So who was your next opponent after that?
So that was L with his Mega Gargants. So fortunately for me, we played on Silksteel Nests, which is 8 objectives, and I know I don't like playing on it. However, Gargants hate playing on it even more because they only have 4 models. And I guess we both kind of misplayed. I didn't know about the Mega Gargant ability, which kind of threw me off a little bit when I found out. But he sent all 4 Megas into the middle of the table, which meant I could tag all 4 of them with my general, which he couldn't retreat from. So I made his general fight last in my Spheranx, and then I just double activated, killed his general, and took off a War Stomper. And then thought, okay, that's fine. And then he went, oh, the Gargant's got this ability to do 4d6 mortal wounds on a 4-up. I was like, oh, okay, like, it's 50-50 chance, and then hopefully he won't spike. So he rolls his 4-up, and then he rolls his 4d6 into 21 mortal wounds, and I was like, okay. So that's 4 of my Vanguard just dead, unless I make some ward saves. Fortunately, I made a few 6-up ward saves from my War Shrine, and He left me with 3 Varangard, and I was like, okay, we're still fine. Trying to tell myself that after I've just seen my unkillable unit get like almost one banged.
Yeah, right.
And then I won priority. I was like, well, he's not going to do it again, is he? Like, surely. So I was like, I've got all my buffs up. I'm not in my buff ranges to put them back on again. You can have the turn.
Yeah.
I knew his Gatebreaker was fighting last, so I was like, okay, so I don't have to worry about the Gatebreaker yet. And then he was like, I'm going to finest hour him. I was like, okay, so we can't attack the Gatebreaker because I can't double activate. I've only got 3 Varangard, so I can't kill him. So we then just try working on another War Stomper and lower it. And he then rolls his 4 up into 4 6s, and my Varangard are just gone. I'm like, oh my god, like this shouldn't be happening. He's done 45 mortal wounds with 2 swings of his club. It then goes back into my turn, and I'm like, right, well, I guess we just do it again, right? We fully stack another unit, and we just send them into these 3 Mega Gargants. And I was like, right, let's just kill the Gatebreaker now, because we have to. And I think I left him on like 5 wounds. And yeah, you guessed it, rolls his 4 up again, and I was like, right, it's going to be less than average this time, it's fine. Did 20 mortal wounds, and I was just like, oh my god. 4 more Varangard dead. But fortunately managed to take off the rest of the wounds needed to kill the Mega, and then get in and win priority again and just do the remaining damage on the War Stompers, which then it looked like a fairly straightforward game as I cruised to victory, whereas if you saw the look on my face as he kept smashing my Varangard off the table was far from the case in the first 2 battle rounds.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you're just like, oh, this is not going my way, and then you end up being able to snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, that was quite a fun game. Unfortunately, like, it didn't take too long because we were scheduled to play till midnight, which probably would have killed me. But when he just has to play with 4 models and they're all kind of stuck where they were stuck, and then I just had to keep running 6 Varangard into him and hope I killed them quicker than he killed me, essentially.
yeah. Awesome. Okay, so you played, just to kind of recap a little bit, you ended up playing Matt Beasley, and his army was Zinch, and then you played
Evan Markham with his Skaven, Gareth Thomas with his Khorne, and L, whose surname I have forgotten, with his Mega Gargants.
Right. Okay. Perfect. All right. So now you're moving into game 5, which you're getting closer to jumping back up into the kind of championship bracket. I think this is your last game of the consolation bracket, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I got my deserved rematch against Matt Beasley.
Okay.
So it was again a really good game. However, in this game, instead of winning 0 priorities, I won every priority. So and we spoke quite a lot after the game, and he was like, I kind of feel like you, as in me, learnt more than I did in the first game than what he did. So I learnt the way in which he wanted to play, and he didn't really see that or be able to take that in from his perspective. So I had a very clear game plan going into it, and again, just maybe a a slight misplay from him probably cost him quite a few points from allowing me to pin in his Enlightened with my General. Because there goes quite a lot of the output from his army once my save stacking's gone. And also, I kind of got to witness firsthand in the first game how strong some of his spells were into my support pieces. So I learnt to kind of protect them as best as I could.
Now, do you think that he didn't maybe learn as much as you? Because I know you didn't get priority a lot in that first turn, so maybe you weren't able to do everything you wanted to in that first game?
Yeah, I think because he was always on the front foot, he probably felt in control of the game rather than having to chase it. When you're constantly in control, you're not having to worry too much about what your opponent's doing because you're ahead and you're just having to maintain that. So you're just going, right, as long as I can do this, and the way Zinch likes to play with all their summoning, you can keep quite good board control on multiple objectives when you're playing in a normal deployment. Whereas we played Won't Back Down. So there is 6 objectives, but it's lengthways. So the board is a lot narrower, so it's really hard for him to escape my Varangard without engaging them in combat. And I knew that was going to play massively into my favour, because in the first game, he kind of really only fought one unit for the game, opposed to having to deal with both. And then once both got in, he realised that, like, I just take off a unit of pink horrors almost every turn with re-rolling all hits and wounds.
Right, and that's incredible.
Yeah, so even, I think, he had a unit of 10 pinks with Mystic Shield, 5 up ward, and my Vanguard just lifted them. So that was with a double activation, but to go through essentially what is 75 odd wounds with the 5 up ward was pretty nice.
Right.
Yeah. And then he realised that actually it doesn't really matter what he sends into them, they will just die, and the fact that I'd locked his Enlightened in combat and they can't retreat from me just meant he had to try and commit to getting rid of my Vanguard with his Screamers, with their mortal wounds when they fly over. But ultimately, once they're in combat, they're there and they can't do those tricks anymore. So, no, it was a really good game and a bit more of a chess match rather than me chasing the game. So, it was good fun to play, and Matt's an absolute pleasure to play against.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of have that rematch. And let me ask you, throughout the tournament, how big of an impact did the missions have on the outcomes of the games? So I argue all the time that all the good players, like the reason that they're great players in the world and in the U.S. and UK and all that is because they know how to mitigate negative aspects, right? So like if they're playing against a or they're playing on a mission that maybe not favors them, they know how to like use their movement to, counteract that, or they know how to like castle up when they need to, or something like that. Did you find that the missions that you had there played in your favor or against your favor, or like how big of an impact did they have on the tournament overall, do you think?
I think Game 6 probably had the biggest impact. However, the rest of the missions I'm usually quite content with. Like, I've played over 140 games of Warhammer in this edition, so I've played a lot of the scenarios multiple times.
Right.
I was quite lucky to get Gargants on Silksteel, because that's a mission that I really don't want to play. Because spreading across 8 objectives isn't the way in which the army wants to play.
Right, but he has 4 maximum Gargants, right? So
Exactly. So to get that matchup into that scenario was hugely beneficial. And then game 6, I have a mission which, for me, mentally and the way I've played and the armies that I come up against, I don't think I can lose.
okay.
Like, ever, really. Like, I'd probably, unless, yeah, I just think with that scenario we played Realmstone Cash. So,
Okay.
I think 9 times out of 10, regardless of whatever army you put into me, I will win, and I'll win quite big.
Yeah.
And I think the only list that could potentially beat me on it is dragons, like all dragons, and you've got to spike mortal wounds. And if you don't,
Yeah.
then I think you still lose.
Right.
Um,
And so game 6, you played Scooter. You jumped back up into the kind of championship bracket there, and Scooter had made his way through. And for you to win, you're going to need to beat Scooter twice, right?
yeah, that's correct. And
yeah.
yeah, so we did the classic. Oh, let's go through each other's armies, and obviously pigs are pigs, so I didn't really need much explaining on that front. And then I told him what my army did, and he was like, "Holy! I did not know that is a thing." And I basically explained to him, like, without trying to get into his head with the dark arts and whatever, I said, "I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the first turn. I'm going to put a unit of Vanguard on that objective with +4 to their save, reroll all hits and wounds, and you're not going to do any damage to me. Which will mean you're going to be on 0 battle tactics turn 1, you're going to be on 0 points in the primary,
Yeah.
so I'm going to be up 4-0, and then I'm going to be up 4-0 again turn 2, but you might score a battle tactic, so it's then going to be 8-2, and then it's going to split, and then I'm going to go and send the rest of my army to one objective, and you have to come and fight me if you want to get back into the game, which you don't do any damage." So, and he was like, "Okay, we'll see," and I was like, "All right." So did my turn, did exactly what I said, and he sent 18 pigs, or no, it might have just been 12 pigs, a Maw Crusher, a Mega Boss on foot into my Vanguard, and he killed 1 on all his impact hits and stomp. He called the War, so he was on Rend 4, Rend 3, and I was like, okay, I'm still on a 2-up re-rolling ones, so you do you, I'll be fine. So he fought with one unit of pigs, and I was like, okay, I didn't take a single wound. And then I fought with my Vanguard, and I took off 6 pigs, and his Mega Boss on foot, so he got to fight. He popped Destroyer, did 0 damage.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Destroyer, I was like, oh, hopefully he can get it with Destroyer, right? Because, I mean...
yeah. So 0 damage, because statistically he does no damage because he doesn't have enough attacks.
Yeah.
And then he went with his Maw Crusher, who did 0 damage. And then I went, I'm going to just use my once per game ability to fight twice, and I killed his Maw Crusher.
Oh.
So he was then left with 6 pigs. I won priority and gave it back to him. And at this point, I think he managed to do eye for an eye on a unit of Iron Golems. And then in his turn, I killed the 6 pigs I was locked in combat with, and then I killed the other 6 pigs, or the other 12 pigs or whatever, in my turn, which meant I won 26-2.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
That is very atypical for Scooter, right?
Yeah. He was like, I've never seen this army played in the US.
Yeah.
It's one thing being told what an army does, and then to see it in person, and how it actually works on a tabletop is something quite different. So he was he was pretty surprised, despite me trying to tell him at the beginning of the game that he literally has zero chance of beating me on this mission because he doesn't have the mortal wound output. So that's quite nice. Like, it was also nice going into the game from a mental point of view, knowing you can't lose and you're taking it to game 7.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, like, I mean, that's a big momentum, like, move into the last game of the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And also probably put some thoughts in his head as to how on earth he has to deal with it. So, yeah, mentally, massive confidence boost meant going into game 7. I knew I had the one up on him already. But his whole demeanour didn't change at all, and he was still an absolute joy to play with.
Yeah. Yeah, he is a big bear, of a man, and I mean he's a very large guy, but he is like one of the nicest guys too. And playing against him across the table, he puts you at ease. He's cheering for you a lot of times when you're rolling. And he's like, yeah, man, do it. Let's see what happens. And he's definitely one of those guys that's like, I'm going to play my game, and let's see you play your game, and let's see who wins. Instead of, like this really, like uber competitive, like I'm going to try to beat you at every turn that I can, so.
No, definitely. He massively came across that way, and everything that you've alluded to of the way in which he plays is 100% the truth. Like, both wishing each other luck on priority, like rooting for him to actually kill a unit of Varangard because he's not taken any off. So stuff like that when it's happened in the game is really good fun to see, and you just like, we'd already won by being invited to the event anyway. So yeah. The fact that I got to play against someone that I've watched on streams, etc., and have those interactions with were fantastic. Obviously beating him adds an extra cherry on the top. But hopefully we'll meet at LVO and we'll get to have our trilogy.
Yeah, the I would call it a rubber match, but you spoiler alert, you beat him in the 7th round to win it all. I think that game was a little bit closer though, wasn't it? Or
yeah, so we played close to the we played Nidus Paths, so 4 objectives, and he basically played a lot more cagey because he realised all the time I have my save stacks, he doesn't do anything. So
right,
we both basically played a chess match for 3 turns and went just on the scoring, doing the battle tactics you could do without engaging, etc. And then I just won a crucial priority and managed to flip the turn back to him. So he basically had a really bad double into me, which he wasn't playing for, and which allowed me to then open up for a better double, which I ended up getting. So once I got the double that I needed to, it just opened up the board for me to score and win the game. But it was a much better representation of top-end Warhammer than what it was in Game 1. And I think Game 1, after kind of explaining it to him, he realised he couldn't really do anything, so he just went, screw it, let's see what damage I can do to give me an idea of what I need to do going into the next game. So I think he learnt a lot from realising his whole army going into one unit that's fully save stacked doesn't do anything. So he was like, right, I can spread you out a bit more now because there's multiple objectives, and play the scenario, which he did really well. And then ultimately it just came down to those 2 priorities where I could just give him a bad double turn for me to get a better one. And that's the way ultimately that wins you games of Warhammer, is not being too eager just to take priority when you don't have to.
Yep. Patience, I think, is a key in this game. For sure, for sure. Well, congratulations on your win of the U.S. Open. It was kind of I know they had the U.S. Open out here before, but with this new format, it almost feels like an inaugural event. The way that they did it, because the last U.S. Open was down in New Orleans, I believe, and it was kind of like 2021, so it was kind of COVID, not really COVID, and it feels like this one was maybe the first, it's kind of the first one that, even though there was other ones before it, it just felt new, so.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic, and both Mike and Zach, who ran the event from Games Workshop, both alluded to at the event that they want to year on year make it bigger and better. So there'll be more qualifying events in the UK, as an example, to get more UK people out there, more people from Central Europe, Australia, etc.
Yeah.
And they just want to make the event as big as it can be. So I'm hoping to qualify again, go out and retain my title.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to see kind of this U.S. Open sort of become the default, World Open, if you will. So that'd be
hopefully, fingers crossed. They seem to be really engaged with the hobby at the moment, and like I say, big shout out to Mike and Zach that ran it for the US.
Now, right on the heels of this victory, you turned around. You mentioned before that you went to Belfast and played in the Six Nations. So is this, I think I told you before when you told me you were headed to the Six Nations, that I'm a rugby player, I'm a rugby coach, and I'm an overall rugby fan. So when I hear Six Nations, my thought, immediately goes to rugby, between Wales, Scotland, England, France, Italy, and Ireland, right? Is the Six Nations kind of similar? Do you pull in the same Six Nations, or is it a different Six Nations? How does the format work here?
Yeah, so it's extremely similar, except it is Northern Ireland, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, and Sweden. So France, I believe, were invited at the inauguration of the Six Nations, however they declined, and then Sweden decided to step up, and basically it's still always going to be Six Nations, so unless one team pulls out, there won't be anyone invited to take anyone's places. So year on year, all Six Nations meet up, each country will host, and we have 5 great games of Warhammer against local rivals for the UK, with all the Welsh guys, the Irish and the Scottish, and then it's quite cool to have the guys fly over from Sweden to take part as well.
Now, is this a one weekend event? Is this a multiple? So, with rugby, obviously, you're not going to play multiple games in a weekend, and so it's takes place over 12 weeks. One game every 2 weeks or something like that. Maybe it's not quite that long, but how does this work in terms of this tabletop game?
So it is just run over a weekend. So
okay,
everyone, you play one round against each country. So it's all 8-man teams. So it's a pretty similar format to Worlds, I believe, in the sense that you have your uncapped score and your capped score. So your cap score is 100 points, and you're on the 20-0 system for win-loss. So you play every country once, and then ultimately you see who comes out on top of the podium. And spoiler alert, England have never lost it. So
wow, okay,
we've kind of we've maintained our success year on year, and this year particularly, we gave out 5 new caps, of which one of them was mine, thankfully, which kind of shows the strength and depth that we have within the England team itself.
Yeah, it's funny because England is the size of the state of roughly the state of Wyoming here in the United States. Yet you've got like I don't know. I mean, when I say England, I meant UK, right? Like UK's got, is roughly the size of Wyoming, and yet you guys have like 60 million people there. The state of Wyoming here has less than 1 million people that live in it, and so, no, that's the least popular. I chose the least populated state for a reason, just to give wild comparisons, but maybe hyperbolic a little bit. But the point is that. In terms of density, I think like where you play, especially like in London, I bet there's a lot of close AOS players that it's easy to kind of get together and play, and going to a tournament in the country, maybe you're going like 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that to get to a big tournament. Maybe it's a little bit more, but sometimes here you got to travel like a day or half a day or something like that to get to tournaments.
Yeah, we're really lucky in the UK. So I'm based right in the southeast. So for a UK tournament goer, I'm in like the worst possible location because most of the big events are in the north. So it's about a 5-hour drive to a lot of the big events. However, you could do a GT every weekend if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I try and tend to do all the big ones, so I'll do maybe 2-3 GTs a month. Because I also just find it's the best way of getting good high quality reps in.
Right.
Against a wider range of armies. But equally, I've always been quite open to travelling around locally, like of an evening. Happy to drive an hour and a half, etc., to someone, play a couple of games of high-end Warhammer, and then drive an hour and a half home. So, I'm happy to do that extra legwork to improve my game by getting good games in with people that I deem to be either better than me or at a similar footing.
Right. Yeah, I think in the United States there's probably, I want to say there's at least a GT every week. The problem is that like that GT might be in Seattle, that GT might be in New York, the next one might be in Texas, the next one might be, and so like if you were to try to do a GT every week, like you would probably go broke just on plane tickets alone, So so I think that's awesome. The more reps and high quality practice you can get in, obviously the better player you're going to be. And I know in talking with Jeremy Vessier, who we had on the podcast, he was the captain of Team America last year. And he was saying that, England's usually the team to beat. And Sweden's a tough team too. So, yeah, a lot of good players.
Yeah, and I guess hot news flash. It's just been announced that I've made the Worlds team for this year as well.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah,
where is Worlds this year? Is it in Ireland? Did I hear that right?
It's in Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
Amsterdam, that's right.
So, unfortunately, a couple of our players have had to drop who can't make it, and myself and Max have been invited up from the Six Nations team to be part of the Worlds team, which would be quite exciting. It means I get to meet all the guys again from New Mexico and hopefully get some more games in with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you, and that'll take place in it's usually what, July, August timeframe.
It is the very end of May to beginning of June.
Oh, geez, that's earlier than I thought. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, great. Well, congratulations. So the last thing I wanted to touch on, and like I said before the show, I know you went kind of deep in depth with AOS Coach on Slaves to Darkness, but I just wanted to, you've been playing your Slaves to Darkness list with the Vanguard, with Archaon, with some of your other things that you have going on. What are your initial impressions of the new Slave to Darkness that's coming out? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be more difficult to maintain your list? What are some of the pros and cons that you think coming out?
I think the play style is going to be a lot different, which I think ultimately will suit me more than it will others. It's not as survivable anymore, and it's now relying on the pure damage output that the army brings, which is far significant to what it used to be, which sounds ridiculous because if anyone's played against me and they've seen me lift all their toys off the table, they'd be surprised by that comment alone, I'd imagine. But there's a lot more utility in the book. I think there's not just the 2 lists that we saw last year being played. I think there's a huge scope for a lot of different lists, so including models that you would never have even given a second look at in the old book. So your knights, your warriors, your chosen are all now fundamental pieces for a lot of lists. They've got a really big glow up. They've got some really cool additions in the sense of ensorcelled banners to have different effects. And then even down to heroes like Chaos Lord and Karkadrak was like utter rubbish in the last edition, whereas now, like with the way the Eye of the Gods works now, his War Scroll ability to immediately fight first and then have a unit of knights immediately fight. There's so much synergy around him, the way you can build like this really strong knight strike first build that will just go in and do an obscene amount of damage, especially whilst we make use of the current Blade of Corn allies, which I'm sure we're going to have to make hay while the sun shines, because that'll all probably disappear when they get their new book this year. But yeah, there's so much utility within the book and loads of different ways you can build lists and play the game. For me, it's really refreshing. I played a hideous amount of games with the old book in the last 12 months, and it was also used to just get known for just being on this 2-up re-rolling 1 armor save, which people would get really salty about, and I'm going to be glad when the salt disappears and I'm playing a more honest, in inverted commas, army, which is looking to just go in there and deal a serious amount of damage. And I'm sure people will get salty when I show them I've got 2 units of 15 chosen and they've got to try and deal with it with a 5-up rally. So I'm sure we'll get the levels of salt back at some point, but at least they can feel like they're killing stuff this time. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it would be harder to get 5 and O's, but I'm looking forward to the prospect of getting it on the table and pushing to get them.
Yeah, it's funny, a lot of the new 3.0 books that even started maybe with the Soulblight Gravelords at the end of 2, right? Which was really, that Soulblight Gravelords was really a 3.0 book in disguise. Because, 3rd edition was right around the corner. A lot of these books, what I love about them and I love about 3rd edition is how we got rid of sort of those battalions in 2nd edition that really boxed you into certain lists, because if you wanted those battalion benefits, you had to take essentially that combination of units. And the way that a lot of these new 3rd edition books are written, I feel like they all give such flexibility in terms of list buildings. There's not like 1 or 2 options only. Like, you can really mix and match and find what really matches your play style, find something that works for you to go out and have a good time and still be competitive. I don't know that we've really seen a book that has been utter garbage yet in 3.0. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
No, I think they've done a really good amount of balancing books. I think the worst book they've brought out is probably Skaven. I think they did a bit of a copy and paste job and didn't really change a huge amount in it. I've not really seen Skaven win events in the UK or consistently do well. Whereas all the other books seem to have at least a list and identity that will enable them to win the odd event. But yeah, I think the Games Workshop team have done an incredible job of trying to balance the game, and with all their new books really honing in on the fact that there is a wide range of ways in which you can play each one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I think Skaven's got some good lists in there. I just don't think enough people are playing it to really tease it out. And maybe it's because like to be able to tease out that good list, you need to invest quite a bit in playtesting a lot of different things with it, and that requires an investment in the model range and trying it out. And I think there's bigger, shinier things than Skaven at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I bought 9 Storm Fiends because I was like, that seems like a good list. And now I kind of just have it to like playtest against when I'm running stuff, because 9 Storm Fiends is a really good teams list. So preparing for stuff like that in a teams environment is quite handy. But I've also realised that you will just get 1 or 2 massively bad matchups in singles that, for me, and the reasoning why I go to events doesn't warrant me taking it, because I just don't think I can win an event with it because it's got too many bad matchups. Whereas like Slaves of Darkness, I know based on statistics they're like the 4th worst army in terms of win rate in the game, but I don't think people play it to its most optimal, because I think this season alone I've got like a 93% win rate with them. Wow. And that's it. That's purely based on competitive games, not club games or anything. Right. So, yeah, it's just getting that identity of working out the list that suits you and the way you want to play it. And Skaven for me isn't one. Like you say, there's a lot of models in that book, and I think it's going to take someone dedicated to Skaven to unlock the potential.
Yeah, somebody just needs to kind of focus down and play it out, and I just don't know that anybody really wants to. There's other girls to dance with at the ball, rather than having to try it out a little bit. So it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see what you pull out for the new Slaves to Darkness. What do you guys use Best Coast pairings out there for your stuff, or like what do you use for a tournament?
So now we will be using Best Coast pairings, I think, for the majority. We used to use a system called Tabletop TO, but that has unfortunately gone offline. So a lot of our tournament organisers now are using BCP. So
the nice thing about BCP, I was going to say, is that we can start looking at some of your lists and seeing what you're doing, just to kind of get an eye out and what you're trying. So we'll have to keep our eye on you as you continue to take the UK by storm, and make your way back to the US next year for the US Open. So
yeah, exactly. No, looking forward to it, and yeah, I'll be out there in LVO if anyone listening wants to come and say hi and talk Slaves to Darkness, or you can slide into my DMs on Twitter. I tend to be quite open in terms of talking all things slaves if people want some advice or what have you.
Oh, that's very kind, and I will totally vouch for the fact that when I hit you up in the DM on Twitter, I got a response almost immediately, and I am also surprised at the hours that you keep, because there's sometimes where I'm like, these got to be in bed by now.
If the NFL's on, I'll be awake.
Oh, really? You're an NFL fan, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately for my sins, the New Orleans Saints aren't doing very well this year.
Oh, well, that's all right. I'm a Green Bay fan, and they are just doing terribly.
Yeah, you know my pain.
Yes. Doing terribly, so... Anyway, Phil, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a great chat. I very much enjoyed getting to know you. It's really interesting talking to somebody from a completely different meta than what we have in the U.S. And you know, it's funny because in the U.S. we have different metas. Like you've got like a Mid-Atlantic, you got a Northeast, you got a Southern California, you got a Northwest Pacific, Texas. I mean, we kind of have different metas within the United States, but it's all of that's completely different than what we see in England or Sweden or something like that. So it's really interesting to hear how you're approaching things. And again, congratulations on the U.S. Open win. Congratulations on the Team England win at the Six Nations. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure to speak to you, and pleasure to spread my love of the hobby to your community as well.
Very, very good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to us tonight. If you have any questions, hit up Phil on Twitter. He's let's see what you're at AOS_Marshy92 on Twitter, and you can also hit us up on social media on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can find Tabletop and Beyond. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you thought about this episode, and provide your comments on what you think of Phil Marsh and his Slave to Darkness. We'd love to hear it. So have a good night, everybody, and keep the dice rolling.